I never imagined that a casual knock on my apartment door could unravel years of carefully tucked away secrets. That evening, the sky was painted with a bruised purple, and the streetlights flickered as if unsure of their purpose. I had just finished arranging my living room when a gentle, deliberate knock echoed through the apartment. It wasn't the usual hurried knock of a neighbor returning late from work. It was calm, patient, almost knowing. I hesitated for a moment, fingers grazing the edge of the door, wondering if I should ignore it. Curiosity, however, got the better of me. I opened the door to find my neighbor's guest standing there. I knew him only by name, Julian, a family friend visiting my neighbor, Mara. He smiled politely, holding a small gift bag, his eyes glimmering with that curious light people carry when they sense something unspoken. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, voice smooth and careful. "Mara mentioned you might be home, and I thought I'd drop this by." The bag was unremarkable, the kind you pick up from a boutique, but it was the way he looked at me that unsettled me. I felt exposed, as though he could see through the layers of ordinary life I had wrapped myself in. I invited him in, noting the slight hesitation in his step, the careful way he surveyed my apartment. I tried to keep my smile easy, casual, but I felt a strange tension, a pull of old memories and secrets I thought I had hidden well.
He placed the bag on the counter and glanced around. "You have a lovely space," he said. His eyes lingered on a corner where I had kept a stack of journals, forgotten, yet central to my private world. I quickly diverted his gaze. "I just try to keep it cozy," I replied, my voice lighter than I felt. Every fiber in me wanted to retreat, to hide behind walls and books and the life I presented to everyone else. But something in his demeanor kept me rooted to the spot. There was curiosity there, yes, but also a warmth that wasn't intrusive. As we talked, I learned he had traveled far to visit Mara, and his stories unfolded like chapters in a book I didn't know I wanted to read. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he had noticed something else, something quiet and deliberate that I always tried to keep hidden from the world. He asked about my work, my days, the small routines that make life familiar. I answered cautiously, aware that even the mundane could reveal more than intended. I noticed the way he occasionally paused, as if sensing a story behind my words, something unsaid but heavy. At one point, his gaze fell on a photo I had tucked into a shelf, a picture of a tree-lined path near my childhood home. It was ordinary, yet it carried memories I rarely revisit aloud. "You seem very connected to your past," he observed softly. I laughed nervously, brushing it off. But I felt the weight of his notice, the gentle uncovering of things I thought were invisible.
We shared tea, small talk blending with moments of silence that were more revealing than conversation. I realized then that he had a way of seeing the quiet corners of a person, the places where life had tucked itself away carefully, away from prying eyes. As he prepared to leave, he paused near the door, eyes meeting mine. "Thank you for letting me in," he said. And there was something in the tone, a hint, perhaps, of acknowledgement of more than just my hospitality. I watched him go, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me with a curious emptiness. Something about the evening felt like a beginning rather than an ending. The stack of journals in the corner seemed heavier now, charged with the quiet recognition that perhaps someone had glimpsed what I had worked so hard to conceal. I sank into the couch, letting the silence stretch, wondering how one brief visit could unsettle the careful equilibrium of my life. Shadows lengthened across the walls, carrying the weight of thoughts I hadn't visited in years. A sense of fragile exposure lingered, yet it was not unwelcome. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. I could still feel Julian's presence in the room long after he had left, as if the air remembered him. Something had shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly, and I knew that the coming days would not be the same. There was a whisper of curiosity, a thread pulled in my carefully arranged world, threatening to unravel in ways I wasn't ready to understand. Outside, the street hummed softly under the moonlight. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, staring at the journals.
wondering which of my secrets had been glimpsed and what Julian had truly seen. I knew, instinctively, that this was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke to a gray drizzle tap in softly against my windows. The streets smelled of wet asphalt and the faint scent of jasmine from the small garden across the road. I should have felt comforted, grounded by the familiar, but instead, the memory of Julian's visit hovered, insistent and disquieting. I tried to shake it off with routine, tea in my favorite mug, soft music in the background, a glance at the stack of journals that seemed heavier now, more significant. I kept my eyes there longer than necessary, wondering if the quiet recognition in Julian's gaze had been something more, a subtle acknowledgement of the stories I had buried, the thoughts I hadn't shared with anyone. The day passed slowly. My neighbor Mara knocked around noon, cheerful as always, oblivious to the lingering tension in my apartment. She talked about Julian in passing, mentioning how much he enjoyed his visit and how curious he had been about my routines. I nodded, smiling, but inside I felt a swirl of unease.
Curiosity could be harmless, but the way Julian's questions lingered in my mind suggested otherwise. As the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, I found myself walking to the small park near my apartment. The benches were damp, leaves clinging to the edges in delicate wet patterns. I sat down, letting the chill seep into my sleeves, thinking about how one brief encounter could make you reconsider the privacy of your own life. Julian hadn't asked anything overt, yet I felt as if he had peeled back layers I thought no one could see. He had a way of noticing small details, the careful placement of photographs, the light worn on my favorite chair, even the way I hesitated before answering certain questions. It wasn't just attention, it was perception. He had recognized the parts of me I kept shielded, the quiet moments that defined who I truly was. I returned home with a restless energy, my mind wandering to possibilities. Had he judged me, or simply acknowledged the depth of the life I had crafted quietly for myself? The journals called to me now, each one a repository of private thoughts, fears, and long-forgotten dreams. I resisted the urge to open them, knowing that in some way, Julian had already seen through the surface. The evening arrived with a gentle hush. Lights flickered on in neighboring apartments, casting soft glows onto the street below. I was in the kitchen when a faint knock interrupted the quiet hum of my thoughts. My heart jumped. Had he forgotten something? Or was it merely the wind against the door? I opened it to see Julian again, but this time the expression on his face carried something different. There was a hesitance, a careful deliberation that had not been there before. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said softly. His eyes searched mine, and I felt the same quiet weight of observation pressing gently but firmly. "I was just passing by," he added, almost as if that explained the sudden appearance. I stepped aside, allowing him to enter, though the instinct to retreat whispered loudly. The room felt smaller with him inside, though nothing had changed. His gaze wandered naturally, lingering here and there, thoughtful and respectful, yet impossibly insightful. We shared tea again, the silence between words thick with subtle understanding. He asked about my favorite books, about the small sketches I sometimes left in my journals, and I felt the pull of something I hadn't expected, a connection that didn't need words, only recognition. It was curious, unsettling, but strangely comforting. At one point, he leaned back slightly, studying the arrangement of my living room. "You've built a quiet world for yourself," he said, voice almost a whisper, "and yet it feels as if you're waiting for someone to notice it." I laughed softly, hiding the tremor in my chest. How could he see so clearly? How could one visitor, one casual presence, unearth the careful construction of solitude I had maintained for years? And yet, I didn't feel exposed in the way I feared, only acknowledged. As he finally rose to leave, there was a softness in his farewell, a lingering look that held the unspoken understanding of secrets glimpsed but respected. I closed the door behind him, heart racing, mind spinning with thoughts I wasn't ready to confront fully. Something had changed. Something delicate, fragile, had been stirred within me. I sat down, letting the quiet settle around me. The journal seemed to call again,
whispering in the dim light, tempting me to revisit old reflections and memories. Julian's visit had left a trace, a sense that the world outside my carefully curated life could intersect with the hidden depths I rarely shared. The night fell slowly, the rain now a soft drizzle, the street empty except for distant footsteps echoing faintly. I realized that this was only the beginning, that his presence had unlocked a door I hadn't known existed, and I wasn't sure whether to feel fear, anticipation, or a complicated mixture of both. The following days felt strangely different, as though the apartment itself was holding its breath. Every little sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, even the distant chatter from Mara's window, seemed magnified.
I realized that Julian's presence lingered in my mind more than in my space, like an invisible thread connecting me to something I had not yet named. I caught myself pausing mid-task, imagining him noticing the smallest detail, the way my pen always rolled to the right, the faint indentation of my favorite chair, even the corner of a photograph that had slipped from the frame. These thoughts unsettled me, but they also sparked a peculiar warmth. It wasn't the kind of warmth born of familiarity. It was the quiet, unsettling thrill of being truly seen. Mara noticed my distraction before I did. "You're quieter than usual," she said one evening over coffee. She set down her cup, eyes curious but kind. "Something on your mind?" I hesitated, not ready to voice the truth. "Just thinking," I said finally, brushing it off with a smile. But Mara's knowing look lingered longer than necessary. She had a way of seeing when someone carried something heavy inside them, even if that weight was wrapped in small, ordinary moments. As night fell, I found myself staring at the journals again. Their pages seemed heavier than before, each one a vessel of memories, reflections, and stories I had never allowed anyone else to witness. Julian's words from our last encounter replayed in my mind. "You've built a quiet world for yourself, and yet it feels as if you're waiting for someone to notice it." Those words wrapped around me, sinking deeper than I cared to admit.
Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled one journal from the stack. Its cover was worn, edges softened by years of handling. I flipped to a page at random, reading passages I hadn't touched in months. Memories of childhood afternoons, secret dreams, and whispered hopes filled the page, and I realized that Julian had, in some subtle way, unlocked a door I had kept bolted. The next evening, a faint knock brought me out of my thoughts. Julian's cousins at the door now felt less surprising, almost expected. His eyes carried the same quiet understanding, the same careful attention that had unsettled me at first, but now seemed almost comforting. "I hope I'm not bothering you again," he said, offering a small smile that held no expectation, only gentle acknowledgement. It's okay," I replied, stepping aside. I wondered if he realized how much his visits had shifted something inside me. We sat with tea once more, the rain tapping softly against the windows, a rhythm that matched the subtle tension in the room. He asked about my sketches this time, about the little doodles that accompanied my notes and thoughts. I showed him one, hesitating as I did, aware that even a casual glance could reveal pieces of myself I rarely exposed. He studied the page carefully, nodding. "These are very personal," he said softly. "I can see the care in each line, the thought behind it." It struck me then how different his presence was from others. No one had ever observed in a way that felt both respectful and deeply perceptive. It wasn't intrusive, it was recognition, an acknowledgement that the quiet parts of life mattered. As the evening deepened into night, I noticed myself relaxing into the conversation, sharing small anecdotes I usually kept tucked away. Julian listened, really listened, allowing each word its own space and weight. There was a delicate understanding in the air, a sense that this connection, however brief, was meaningful in its own quiet way. When he finally rose to leave, there was a pause at the door. His gaze lingered, not with expectation, but with the acknowledgement of something delicate and unspoken. I felt a strange emptiness as he stepped out, the apartment suddenly too large, too quiet without the soft echo of his presence. I lingered by the window,
watching the rain trace paths down the glass. The journals called again, whispering of memories I had almost forgotten. Julian's quiet observation had awakened something inside me, a subtle tension between fear and anticipation, secrecy and revelation. For the first time, I wondered if I had been waiting for someone like him to notice the hidden corners of my life, someone who could see the parts I had never dared to share. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Outside, the world carried on with its usual rhythm, unaware of the fragile shift that had taken place inside my small apartment.
I hugged the blanket around my shoulders, heart quietly racing, realizing that Julian's visits were beginning to uncover more than I had intended to reveal, and somehow I was not ready to stop them. The days seemed to stretch longer now, filled with an almost tangible awareness of Julian's presence, even when he wasn't there. Every time I arranged a book on the shelf or placed a cup on the counter, I imagined how he might notice the little details, the patterns I took for granted. It was unsettling, yet I found myself anticipating it, drawn to the quiet tension that his perception brought into my life. One evening, Mara came by again, and her cheerful chatter filled the apartment. She spoke about Julian's plans to explore the nearby town, his excitement over small discoveries, and the little conversations they had shared. I nodded along, careful not to reveal the restless thoughts he had stirred within me. Yet every mention of his name sent a ripple through my chest, a subtle reminder that he had seen something in me I had never shown anyone else. After she left, I found myself wandering to the balcony, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. The journals called to me again, their weight heavier than ever, filled with secrets I had once thought safe. Julian's visit had left them charged, as if his presence had activated some quiet part of my life that had been dormant for too long. That night, a knock came at the door, soft, deliberate, and familiar. Julian stood there once more, his expression calm, his eyes carrying that same thoughtful intensity. "I hope I'm not imposing," he said, stepping inside after my invitation. There was a gentle rhythm to his movements, a quiet ease that made his presence feel natural, yet his awareness was unwavering. We sat in the living room, the air thick with the unspoken understanding that had grown between us. He asked about my work, about the small routines that structured my days, and I answered with a careful honesty I had never shared with anyone outside my closest circle. There was no judgment in his voice, only recognition, and it felt both comforting and frightening at the same time. At one point, his gaze fell on a particular shelf, one I had thought was perfectly ordinary. It held trinkets, photographs, and a small locked box that I had hidden behind a stack of books. I caught his eyes lingering, and for the first time I felt a flicker of fear. Had he noticed the box, the secrets I had worked so hard to conceal? "I've always admired how people create little sanctuaries for themselves," he said softly, drawing my attention back to the conversation. His words were gentle, careful, yet they carried the weight of understanding. I realized that he might have seen the box, or at least sensed its significance, and he chose to respect it, not pry. We spoke until the city fell silent outside, the hum of life replaced by the soft whisper of night. His visit left a lingering presence, a quiet warmth and tension that settled into the apartment like a familiar scent. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't anticipated, yet there was no discomfort, only the profound awareness that someone had glimpsed the hidden parts of me without judgment. When he finally rose to leave, he paused at the door, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Thank you for letting me in," he said, and there was a softness in his tone that carried more than mere politeness. I closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment, heart racing, mind alive with the possibilities his visits had opened. I moved to the journals again, drawn irresistibly. Opening one, I allowed myself to read passages that had remained untouched for years, reflecting on memories I had tucked away and emotions I had tried to forget. Julian's presence had created a bridge between my hidden self and the world outside,
a connection I hadn't realized I longed for. The night deepened, and the city became a blur of lights and quiet echoes. I wrapped myself in a blanket, the journals spread around me like old friends, and thought about the subtle transformation that had begun. Julian had entered my life in a way that was delicate, gentle, yet impossibly significant. The careful boundaries I had drawn were softening, and I wasn't sure whether to be afraid or to embrace the change. Outside, a soft drizzle began, tracing patterns along the balcony rail.
The world felt different now, as if it had shifted subtly while I wasn't looking. I realized that I was no longer content to keep my life entirely to myself. Something had awakened, a quiet curiosity, a fragile hope, and a sense that the hidden corners of my world were meant to be acknowledged, even if only by someone who understood. And yet, there was still the small, locked box, the secret I had thought utterly invisible. Julian had seen so much, and I wondered if he had glimpsed it too. My heart beat faster at the thought, a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. The night stretched on, and I knew that the next time he appeared, the fragile balance of my carefully curated life would be tested in ways I wasn't fully ready for. The following evening arrived with a soft hush, the city wrapped in a gentle mist that blurred the edges of buildings and streetlights. I had spent the day in quiet anticipation, the journals laid out across the table, the small locked box tucked safely beside them. Every shadow, every subtle sound felt magnified, as if the world itself had grown attentive to the delicate tension that had filled my life since Julian's visits began. There was a knock at the door, familiar and deliberate. I opened it to find him standing there, a small smile playing on his lips. His presence, as always, carried a quiet assurance, a calm understanding that unsettled me yet drew me in. "I hope it's not too late," he said softly.
"It's never too late," I replied, stepping aside. Somehow the apartment felt smaller, more intimate, yet the invisible weight of my secrets pressed gently against the walls. I guided him to the living room, aware of how every item, every photograph, every trinket felt suddenly significant under his attentive gaze. He settled into the chair across from me, and for a long moment we simply sat. The silence was comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding that had grown between us over these past days. It was not casual curiosity anymore. It was recognition, acknowledgement, a delicate bridge built on observation and respect. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quiet, "about the small details people hide, the things they think no one notices." His eyes met mine, and I felt a shiver of both apprehension and trust. It's remarkable how the quietest corners can hold so much. I nodded, unsure if I wanted to speak or remain silent. The journals were there, waiting, their pages heavy with memories and emotions I had long tucked away. And yet, I realized I was no longer afraid of being seen, not by him. He had approached my world with gentle awareness, acknowledging without prying, noticing without judgment. Slowly, almost hesitantly, I reached for the journals. I opened one, letting him see the sketches and notes I had carefully preserved. His eyes softened as he looked, and there was a reverence in his attention that made me realize just how much I had longed for someone to understand, not to comment, not to analyze, but simply to recognize. We spoke then, sharing stories that had lived only in the margins of my life. Memories of rainy afternoons, the quiet corners of my childhood, reflections that I had never voiced aloud, all unfolded naturally, carried gently in the presence of someone who truly saw. There was no rush, no judgment, only the slow, unfolding acknowledgement of a shared human experience. Eventually, my gaze shifted to the small locked box. I hesitated, hand hovering over it, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if he had noticed it all along. I decided to leave it closed. Some things I realized were meant to remain private,
even when the rest of my world was open gently to someone else. Julian rose to leave, but this time there was a pause, a quiet depth in his look that held the weight of understanding and care. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me see a part of your world." I closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a long moment. The apartment felt alive in a different way, filled with the gentle echoes of conversation and recognition. The journals, the sketches, even the locked box, they were all part of a life that had been quietly acknowledged, transformed by the awareness of someone who had truly noticed. I sank into the couch, a soft sigh escaping me.
The city outside was quiet, wrapped in mist and soft streetlights, yet inside, a fragile warmth spread through me. Julian's visits had shifted something delicate and profound, the understanding that it was possible to be seen, to be understood, without losing the parts of yourself you held most sacred. As the night deepened, I allowed myself to reflect on the subtle transformation, the quiet tension, the fragile anticipation, the acknowledgement of hidden corners. All of it had woven into a new awareness. Life, I realized, held space for recognition and respect, even for the things we think no one notices. I closed the journals, letting the room settle into its familiar stillness. The locked box remained untouched, a symbol of the private self that was mine alone. Yet the rest of my world, my routines, my memories, my quiet life, had been gently opened, acknowledged, and respected. And in that recognition, I found a calm I had never expected, a quiet hope that the fragile threads of human connection, even in their simplest form, could bring a profound shift. The night was still, the city wrapped in mist, and I felt finally the peaceful presence of being seen without being exposed, understood without being judged. It was a soft ending, yet somehow, in its quiet way, it felt like a beginning too.